An inspiration can be fleeting. It occupies our head with a flash of excitement and hope, and then quietly fades away. Or it lingers in the space between possibility and manifestation, waiting for someone to nurture it into being. That inspiration, felt 60 years ago by one woman, Margaret McIntosh, did not quietly slip from thought. Instead, it spurred her into action, and that inspiration spread from one to another until it became the Racine Literacy Council. In 1965, Margaret McIntosh encountered people in the city without the ability to read or write English. She was president of United Church Women, an ecumenical group with chapters around the country. Through this church network, she met Frank Laubach, a missionary who developed a way of teaching literacy. His philosophy was that if one would teach one, our communities would be stronger and literate. Margaret took the tutor training and started teaching people at her kitchen table. Soon, word traveled, and a news story prompted calls from 35 potential tutors who would soon join her, all working from their homes. By 1966, they decided to make a literacy council. Dues were $3 a year, and membership was open to people concerned about literacy. In its first year, George Bray was elected president of the council. He and his wife were among the first tutors trained. Bray was a notable Racinian, a retired S.C. Johnson employee, and the founder of Racine's NAACP. He became an alderman and was instrumental in starting a Head Start program in the city. During his leadership, the group grew larger, training 100 volunteer tutors by 1967 and successfully teaching 65 learners. They applied for nonprofit status that year, and in 1968, they launched an awareness campaign. Local corporations and businesses supported the effort, as did Racine's Dominican Sisters, who hosted a tutor workshop, and 18 sisters became certified tutors. By 1970, Margaret McIntosh was named president of Racine Literacy Council, and 2 years later, she recruited Lucille Nelson to help her. The group was so large, they needed to move from kitchen tables to a home. Holy Communion Church offered them space in 1974, and a year later, Lucille Nelson led the group as president. Margaret continued to teach students, but it became too difficult to train tutors, teach students, do publicity, and track results for volunteer organizers. They needed more support. From 1965 to 1982, the council operated with a small group of volunteers with a budget that was under $1,000 and came mostly from $3 membership dues. They were struggling. Lucille Nelson approached the Johnson Wax Fund with a $30,000 proposal for seed money to hire an executive director. The grant was awarded, and the council hired its first executive director, Sandra Hare, and opened a new literacy center inside of what was Cristo Rey Church downtown. The following year, with the support from area companies, the council could hire a part-time coordinator, Sandy Tait, who would later become executive director of the organization. With that office support, Racine Literacy Council could be open for 40 hours a week and boost its recruitment of tutors and students. By 1984, they doubled the number of tutors engaged and tripled the number of students serviced. A few years later, the council was struggling. Cristo Rey needed its space back, and RLC needed a new home. While they had 82 tutors and 91 students, they had little money for rent, staff, supplies, and learning materials, and were soon to be homeless. The council turned to United Way for emergency funding. In 1986, Sandy Tait learned of space available on the second floor of what was Family Service, and the council moved into its new home. 2 years later, Sandy was offered a new position with Private Industry Council, and Carol Anschutz stepped in as executive director. During Carol's time, the council received more attention from notable people. Barbara Bush, a longtime literacy advocate, visited Racine. Former U.S. Senator Herb Kohl met with students to discuss their needs. And Robert Laubach, the son of the literacy founder, made a visit. In the early 90s, Anschutz announced two new programs, a family literacy program, which later spun off into a separate nonprofit program, and satellite locations for tutors and students to meet. During the early 90s, the Racine Literacy Council Board of Directors reorganized and developed a new strategic plan to serve the community. They hired Kay Greger to lead the organization as executive director. For nearly one-third of its existence, Kay worked to sustain and spread the mission of Racine Literacy Council by bringing many others along the way. Here are Kay's thoughts about the Racine Literacy Council's impact, along with others who have been involved for the last 3 decades.
Though it's had, humble beginnings, and we were upstairs of another nonprofit on 7th Street, long walk up those steps, non-accessible steps for many, many people. So I think the biggest tangible thing that I could say is that when we purchased the building at 734 Lake Avenue, it gave us a true presence in the community. It was located near the library and Gateway Technical College, and we partner with both of them. And so I think people stood up and noticed this is not just a small program, but a nonprofit entity that has a place in the community. What I think was commendable is that we had so many volunteers who kept everything going so well and stayed with us for many, many years. I'm talking over 10 years. There's tutors and volunteers that have done that. The one story I have to tell about that I find interesting is that when the Racine Literacy Council started out, it was the Frank Laubach program that we followed. And he was a missionary and overseas, and brought back this concept of each one teach one. And that's how the tutoring concept came about. And of course, there's the history of how it got started here in Racine and so forth. But one of the quirky things that happened was we were teaching basically for people who knew English, and English was their first language. And it turned out that there was a lady there who said, "And what about the Hispanic community?" And I think we were all taken aback. We hadn't realized the largeness of the Hispanic community, and we're talking back in 1993. So we decided that at the board and staff that we needed to expand our program to include English as a second language, which is the terminology that has been used, ESL. And that was a breakthrough point, I think, in our program. We did go back and look at about some of the tutors and students who were working, and about 5 students were from other countries, and they were learning English, but through the Laubach method. And so we expanded our programming and offering and training to tutors to work with people who were learning English as their second or possibly third or fourth language. So I think that was a big breakthrough in our program to see that expansion. Now, we were also at that time meeting upstairs, like I said, a Children's Service Society, and it was small, and it was at the top of a stairway. And when they wanted more space, they said we needed to be looking for a move. And that was the other big thing, I think, is in the purchasing of the building at 734 Lake Avenue. And that story is really a wonderful story because it's a medical clinic, as most of you know. It was a former medical clinic, and the rooms where people were being examined were now tutoring rooms. And so it's worked out extremely well for the whole program. Last but not least, I have to mention Andy McLean. Professor McLean came on board, really started fundraiser with a Celtic Night for Literacy, and that went on for over 20 years while he was on the board. And a lot of people got to know us through those fundraisers. They not only were to raise money, but to also raise awareness. And we had a good time doing that. And so I'm glad that we're celebrating at this time of the year near St. Patrick's Day, and to thank Andy McLean and all the people who participated in all of our fundraisers.
In 2003, Gateway at the state level contacted Racine Literacy Council and said, we have $250. Can you start a Walworth County Literacy Council program? And that's where Racine Literacy Council really became a parent of Walworth County Literacy Council. So in 2003, actually 2002, 2003 probably, I put together wrote the bylaws and articles of incorporation and set up the board of directors, and they really had a sort of a informal program there. Judy Stone was a volunteer who was doing tutoring, and she was sort of in directing a couple other tutors, and so I connected also with her.
Kay Greger had reached out to me because she knew I had done some literacy work as an undergrad and was wondering if I wanted to help them with a couple of things that they had planned. They were looking for someone to help with some of their fund development and events. And then they were also looking at adding some different kinds of literacy, things that were really new to the literacy world. I remember we did a weekend, every Saturday event for, I don't know, 6 or 9 weeks in the summer with an ELL population where because Kay had gotten a small grant, we were able to go out into the community and do some hands-on literacy work. I remember we visited the farmers market, and I remember the group being a little uncomfortable going there. They were concerned that because they didn't speak English much or well, that maybe it was going to be a difficult encounter. And when they got there and saw that a number of the farmers were actually second language speakers or third language speakers, that they were very comfortable and very happy. And everybody had, I remember, $5 to buy something they'd never eaten before. And when we finished, we went back to the Racine Literacy Council downstairs in the basement where there was a little kitchen, and we prepared the foods that they had gotten. And I remember there was a lot of zucchini. And so we did lots of things with zucchini that day. So my life with the Racine Literacy Council has gone from like 0 to where it is today. I'm the regional consultant from the state organization to the Racine Literacy Council. So Laura and I work together on program development and board training and anything that I can do to help the Racine Literacy Council be as good as it can possibly be. I love that my community is a better place because of the Racine Literacy Council. Because people who might not otherwise have gotten the training that they need, the education that they need, the tutoring that they needed to be better readers, to be better English speakers, to become citizens because of the help that they've gotten. For all of those reasons, Racine is a much better place. And I can't even imagine, and I hope you've done the math, of how many lives have been touched by the Racine Literacy Council in 60 years. But I know it's made a huge difference.
After 23 years of dedication to literacy in Racine, Kay retired. Steve Musendin was hired as executive director, but the COVID pandemic brought the toughest challenge that RLC would face. The office closed, and most instruction stopped March of 2020 to keep students, tutors, and staff safe. With little alternative, the staff was let go. Stephen kept the organization afloat with the aid of federal emergency loans. RLC students, many of them essential workers, were the least likely to have internet connection, computers, or the digital literacy to pivot to virtual learning. although a handful of tutor-student matches were able to pick up on instruction later in 2021. By December 2021, Stephen reopened the office and hired a part-time employee, Jessica Brewick, to assist him. In January 2022, he brought on another part-time program coordinator, but just 1 month later, he unexpectedly passed away. The 2 staff members, board members, tutors, and students were devastated.
And I think the biggest impact someone has had on me here is working with Stephen for the short amount of time that I did, and have when he passed away. It was harder on me than I thought I did for the short amount of time that I knew him. And I felt like even when things weren't always perfect here, I needed to stay here and complete the mission for him, because I knew that, he would want this place to continue to succeed for as long as it can.
In August 2022, Laura Sumner-Kuhn, who was a member of the board, stepped down from the board and into the role of the executive director. She slowly hired staff and rebuilt programs. These 60 years have brought thousands of volunteer tutors and learners together to improve their literacy and lives. Racine Literacy Council proudly stands on this foundation to move literacy into our communities for the decades to come.